Okay, we are now recording. Last time, to do a review, and let me see if I can pull this up very, very quickly. Oh, I have to share screen. Okay, share screen. Where are you? As you can see, we have quite an interesting amount of movement that takes place about 5,000 years ago. There are indigenous peoples in what we now call India. But this area right here seems to be the area where numbers of people from up here and down here will somehow bang into each other. And this is about, I said, 5,000 years ago, about 3000 BCE. And this group here, in whatever they're doing as hunter or gatherers and banging into each other and intermarrying and stuff, will somehow get the idea of inventing a wheel and taming the horse. And as is often the case with Homo sapiens, we move, especially now that you can move quickly with wheels and horses, and you can move herds. And this group here will move here, 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 but it will also go east. It goes west, it goes east. And as you can see down here, it will also go down further. You can notice over here, but we can't see it. I don't know if I could see it, pull it up here, if you could see this over here, but wait a minute. Let me see if I can do this better. Hold it. There we go. If you can see this, this is India. And this group will also go in through here, down through here, and down through here. So what we have then is all kinds of movement. Plus, we tend to forget very easily. Oh, wait a minute. That not only did we have people moving from the southern steppe area of Russia and moving up from Turkey, making this large, what we now call Indo-Iranian group, moving east and west, we also had individuals already living in the area of India and China. And we're going to find that we do studies of this. The word admixture comes along all the time. This is when group A meets group B. And this is not necessarily bloody warfare, like you and I have always been made. Small groups gather, they find literally there's safety in numbers. You get people who look like you, smell like you, act like you, and you find there's safety in numbers. And you get admixtures, and then they move. So what ultimately happens is about 3000 BCE, before movements going east happen, indigenous peoples in now what we call the Indus Valley, which is what we consider Pakistan today, it was India back then, Afghanistan, in areas like that, begin to build a culture. It becomes one of the great 6 civilizations of antiquity. And if you remember the 6, remember, see if everybody can remember, there is Mesoamerica, and there's the Andes. That's 2. Egypt is 3. The Fertile Crescent is 4. Northern China is 5. And the Indus Valley is 6. Tremendous waterways enable people then to be able to move goods up and down. The cities, as we have begun to unearth them and stuff, had big boulevards. They were laid out in grids. If you read about housing in the Arapa culture, the town of Arapa, you're going to find, interestingly enough, they had a way of putting hot water over roofs when it got cold to keep you warm. And they had a way of putting cool water over roofs. This is 3000 BCE. Cool water over your roofs to keep you cooler in the summertime. Houses were broken up into different rooms. They had a sanitation system that would make medieval Europe look more ancient, look like pre-hunter-gatherer. That's how organized they were. They had stamps on which they stamped stuff for business. I mean, when you traded goods, they had stamps on the good that you traded, and all kinds of interesting figurines. They have some figurines of dancers and things like that that look contemporary. It's an amazing culture, but we don't have any language. We have not found any written documents or language. It goes through, as you can imagine, many phases. By the time the Iranians and the steppe peoples move in from the west, about 3,500 years ago, this is about 1500 BCE, the Harappa culture has already begun to decline. And interestingly enough, climate change is a big deal. Those rivers and estuaries have begun to dry up. In another 800 years or so, this great culture will have been total decline. But weather was a major, major factor. And by the way, I don't know if you know anything about modern India today, but the biggest secret in India today is on the verge of collapse from its water tables. The water tables in India for the last 50 years have been sinking and sinking and sinking. And one of the things that India doesn't want you to know about is the numbers of thousands of farmers that commit suicide every year. It's one of the big secrets nobody wants you. So while you've heard about Mumbai and you've heard about great technology from India, let me point out India has 1.2 billion people. What we're talking about in terms of technology and all of that is a mere fraction of the people in India. I don't know if you're aware of this, that when cell phones were all over the place, only a few million people out of the 1.2 billion had cell phones. We thought of Delhi, New Delhi, Calcutta, Mumbai, the big cities, trading places on Gujarat on the coast. But you take a look at India, it is an enormous country, and 80% of India today is rural, 80%. That is a huge landmass with sinking water tables. So the idea of civilizations being absolutely whacked by climate change is very real. Antiquity is loaded with it. Those of you who may have read about the flood in the New Testament and the Old Testament might want to know there is an actual occurrence of a huge flood. Let me digress for a moment. Ryan and Pittman were two geologists at Columbia University, and they kept on reading this story, and they were convinced that there was truth behind the story. So for 20 summers, when they had off, they rented boats and stuff and went to the Mediterranean. And this is some of the things they gathered. There was a mini ice age in Europe. When that mini ice age needed water, the Atlantic dropped. The Atlantic Ocean dropped several feet. When it dropped several feet, the Mediterranean dropped with it, because as it dropped, the water went out of the Mediterranean, would drop. And at one point, the Mediterranean was a dry waterbed, it was a dry bed. They sent these big tubes down into the ground to drill down into the ground, and they found sediment that was wet, and then they found sediment that was bone dry. And so they totaled it together, and they found that about 7,000 BCE, the ice began to now follow how this goes. The ice began to melt rapidly. By 7,500, not only did the Atlantic rise, the Mediterranean rose. Now, I don't know if you know your Mediterranean history, but you know where Constantinople or Istanbul is, and you know where the Black Sea is. Between the two, there was a landmass. Yes, there was a landmass connecting that part of what we call Europe to Asia. There was a landmass. And you could actually see this now on photographs they've taken. The water pushed against the landmass. The water pushed against the landmass. Now, as that's happening, the Black Sea is about 300 feet deep, lower than where the Mediterranean is. It was a lake, a freshwater lake. About 7,000 to 7,500 years ago, that push from the Mediterranean broke through the landmass and poured salt water into the Black Sea. it looked like Niagara Falls for 3 years or so, until the Black Sea leveled out with the Mediterranean. They sent the guy that found the Titanic, Robert Ballard, they sent his submarines down to the bottom of the Bosphorus Strait. They sent him down to the bottom of the Black Sea, and guess what? They found original foundations that they took stuff from, and dated 14 to 7,500 BCE. That shows that, yes, it was a foundation and it got inundated. If you look at the Black Sea today, the bottom 20% of the Black Sea is fresh water. Seriously. The other top is salt water. It's one of the most unique things you're going to find in the world. Salt water on top, fresh water. So when you go down to the bottom of the Black Sea, everything is perfectly preserved. None of the organisms can breathe. Yes, there is oxygen in the fresh water, but that oxygen is gone because the salt water took it all out. So you have this incredibly interesting phenomena of the Black Sea. This huge flood took place, and they were able to table it out. Now, then there was a group that came and said, no, this didn't happen. And the Lewis thing said, yes, we've modified it a bit, but this basically is the truth. So when you have things happen in antiquity because of weather, it's true. Ice ages wipe things out. Volcanoes wipe out people. You're going to find now, if you've paid any attention to Greenland, we're seeing parts of Greenland, the land itself, that hasn't been seen in what? Millennia. There are things, there are glaciers that are in Greenland that are now gone. Nobody ever thought you'd ever see the ground under these glaciers, certainly not in our lifetime. If you've been paying attention to the Antarctic, Antarctica has been losing ice chunks bigger than Manhattan. I mean, it's incredible what climate change is doing. And the water, that means that the Pacific and the Atlantic is beginning to rise. And this is why, if everybody's talking about condos along the beach, I cannot, having grown up on an island, I can't imagine why anybody would invest that kind of money on that kind of property, knowing that you've got weather to deal with. I grew up on a rural island, and it's off the coast of southern New Jersey, where we used to get hurricanes. If you look at the map of the United States, southern New Jersey gets hit with hurricanes on a regular basis. I remember seeing the ocean and the bay meet 1 block from our house. March 1963, the famous March 1963 storm. Unbelievable. And so nobody in Brigantine built these big things until about 25 years ago, when Money discovered the island and they McMansioned the island, and then Hurricane Sandy came along. It wiped it all out. Sorry. Locals warned them not to build this stuff the way they were building. Now, if any of you have ever been to Miami Beach, you'll notice Miami Beach is disasters waiting to happen. Now, one last thing before we get off of disasters and climate, you've heard of the Canary Islands. The Canary Islands have one of their giant volcanoes. Geologists have said it's not a question of if, it's a question of when the volcano erupts. When the major volcano erupts, the entire mountain is going to go into the Atlantic Ocean. The way the volcano is situated and the island is situated on, it will produce a 100 to 150 foot tsunami that will be unimpeded as it races across the Atlantic. Guess what's on the other side of where that thing is racing to? Key Largo, that incredibly expensive Ocean Reef Club, and Miami Beach, and all that stuff along the shore. And Key Biscayne will be a once upon a time. So I just share that with you when I see this stuff. And any of you who've never lived in Miami, you'll know that we used to have real issues with coding. And we used to have real issues with inspecting. And our house is an example of that. We had a thing called wind mitigation 5 or 6 years ago, when the insurance companies wanted to make more money. So they sent around and had every house inspected to see if it was enveloped. So if a hurricane came and it wasn't enveloped, they would not have to pay out money. So the guy came into our house and he said, the insurance company will not believe what happened to your roof. And I said, what? He said, yours is the only roof in the entire area that's tied down according to code. He said, I have to take pictures of this because none of the other roofs are. I said, well, how did that happen? He said, because the building, I won't mention the name of the corporation because it's still around. The corporation simply showed the inspector your house as an example of what the houses were like. Building inspectors, being what they were back then, assumed, that all the rest of the houses were like that. Our insurance went down, everybody else's went up. And they all wanted to know why. I don't know why this, if anybody doesn't knows Miami, this is very, very normal for Miami. And what we're now seeing, we had a guy whose name was Danger. He was the building inspector. He got fired because he insisted upon doing the codes the way they're written. And he got fired for being too strict. Now it's all come back. It's all come back to haunt us. So those houses, 70% of all the condos built were built before 1990, which means they are no different than the one that just collapsed. So climate, salt air, salt water, beaches, melting ice, all plays a role. It plays a role now, but it also plays a role. And that's how the Arapaho culture gets going, because of fabulous climate, fabulous waterways. They begin to dry up and the culture declines. As it's near it's called middle to low decline, about 3,500 years ago, people then wrote down for the first time all the discussions religiously that were going on. You had indigenous peoples living in the Indus Valley with their different religious beliefs. As groups move in, they brought their beliefs with them. Now, you may have heard the word Aryan. We now have dropped the word Aryan. Oh yeah, there we go. Salting out is also something that happens. Salting out, yes. Irrigation led to salt accumulation. Yes, the same kind of thing. Now, what's going to happen is you're going to find these groups, when we dropped the word Aryan, thanks to the Nazis, the Nazis gave this idea that all Aryans were blonde hair, blue-eyed, Teutonic, whatnot, 6'1", 6'2", this image. In fact, the Germans would have been at the Nazi promulgates of the great super race would have been shocked to know that the first blonde-haired people were in fact African tinted skin in the Levant. And I'm serious, and blonde hair and blue eyes is a mutation. It's new in humankind. Look it up on the internet. It's a mutation. It's a genetic mutation. It's fairly new in the development of hominoids. Neanderthals were dark-haired and red-haired. They found an ancient specimen in the United Kingdom. This thing, I love it, was not blonde hair, blue-eyed in some mythology. It was brown skin and red, rusty hair. Ha! So this idea that there's these blue-eyed, blonde-haired giants running around is a nice myth. It didn't exist. That's right. These were out of Africans who got a mutation that had the first yellow hair, blonde hair, and blue eyes are all mutations from 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. That's it, folks. That's not long ago. Okay, now having said, and they weren't in Germany either. Having said that, you get then in the Indus Valley, you get then all these people moving in, people that are indigenous, and they begin to put their views together. It's not like what happened at All Souls. All Souls is a classic example of how the Arapaho culture puts out a thing called like the Vedas. All Souls starts out with mostly Hispanic, mostly former Roman Catholics. They're all Roman Catholic in background, left the Catholic Church. There were some Anglicans from from Jamaica, who lived here now, who brought with them their remembrances of the Anglican liturgy. But you had a hodgepodge and a couple of Protestants who were also very, very liberal. So the question was, can you have a liberal Christianity as it began? Now you'll see how this evolves. As it evolves, can you have a liberal Christianity without a dogma and doctrine? And I said, of course you can. So they said, show us how you can do this. So we had a service on Easter, and then people decided to form. But along the way, some ex-students who were Jewish decided that they liked the idea that you could believe in Jesus as a teacher, and you didn't have to have Christian dogma or doctrine to also be part of a group. So they came in. Then some atheists decided that they liked the fact that they could be atheists and still be welcomed. And so you got atheists moving in, agnostics moving in, Jewish people coming in with their background. And so what you then have is a combination of different groups of people, different ethnic groups, different religious ideas that found they were all comfortable with each other. Then a Muslim family, who are former students as well, liked the fact that you could see Jesus as a teacher. And so since they did not see Jesus, but they felt welcome, they came in too. So over time, you begin to get what? So if you ask All Souls, is All Souls all souls? You could say yes. And we had the very, very famous Faith House. Now, the Faith House was made when Fraser, who comes in a couple of times a year to preach, John Fraser is an atheist. He teaches at the Arts and Philosophy department. And he brought his daughter along. He said, would you explain to our daughter how a group like this operates? So I built a house. I had this marker, and I had a house. I said, okay, the foundation is the teachings of Jesus, but not about Jesus. There's a big difference. Jesus' own teachings versus teachings about Jesus. Then I said, up here we have a Hindu living room, a Sufi prayer room, a Jewish library, an atheist atrium, a Taoist garden. Does that make sense to everybody? How you put together a faith house? And I said, there's a room here. And so she said, what if other people come in? I said, we build more rooms. She said, I didn't know you could do that. I said, why not? Who said you can't do that? She said, I never thought about that. I said, you can build more rooms. So you get a room for everybody, but it's still one house. I said, it can work. So as you look at All Souls today, you might say our template began 4,000 years ago, when people, an indigenous group of people, had other people move in, and other people move in, and other people move in. And finally, somebody said, we need to write this stuff down. Does that make sense to y'all? We need to write it down so it doesn't get lost. And so the Vedas, about 3,500 years ago, about 1500 BCE, are the first really big writings we have of ancient religion. One is about creation. One's about stories about God's manifestations, Brahman's manifestations. We'll get to that in a while. One will be about rituals. One will be about stories about different groups of people. And the 4 Vedas will be absolutely enormous, and they will come back to haunt polytheists in the 19th century. We'll get to that later too. So then we start out then, right off the bat in Hinduism 1, which I sent to you, the Indus Valley, the Harappa culture, we cross out the word. Yes, that's what Hinduism does. It absorbs everything. Now, let me say right off the bat, because Hinduism, we'll get to the word Hindu in a minute, because this religion is so mixed from the beginning, it adopts, if you will, a mangrove mentality. It has so many different people, so many different ideas, that it begins to understand you can't make everybody believe the same thing. In fact, you might say it has a severe allergy to making everybody believe the same thing. It doesn't go with this group. You're going to find in other religions, there is always some group that's trying to make everybody believe the same thing. This is totally antithetical to the way Hinduism starts and the way Hinduism remains. It is, as I said, a mangrove. and I was trying to remember the name of that I think it's called a ficus tree. A Bodhi tree does this too, where it has these incredible branches. The branches are so heavy, they go down to the ground and then they'll do roots again. Have you ever, it's a kind of tree that get the branches, they'll lay on the ground and they'll begin to root. So you got this thing going up, down, re-rooting and more, and it gets out there. So if you can understand that concept, when people say, well, your religion's very diverse. Well, the oldest religion in the world that we have that's written down started diverse with diversity and embrace that as a very, very realistic way to live. Okay, now, about 1,000 years after this has been read, these Vedas have been written down, 1,000 years go by. Guess what? It turns out nobody understands what the Vedas are. Nobody's read them. And so a reform movement comes by. You're going to love this, the way this works, to write the Upanishads. You may have seen that word. The Upanishads, Upanishad means to sit at the feet of a guru. It's like the Upanishads, if you're sitting at the feet of a guru to teach you what it's all about. The problem is, in trying to reduce these 4 Vedas into one work, the Upanishad then becomes enormous itself, and it turns out only 2% of all Hindus have ever read it. So what Hindus today basically know is what little they've read of what part of Hinduism. But it's like everything else. When I ask people in my classes who say they know the Bible, and I throw a couple of things out at them, they go, that's in there? I didn't know that. People say they know things, but it turns out most people don't have time to really read things. When I taught Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, I gave everybody a Bible quiz. You're going to love this. I gave everybody a Bible quiz before we started, because my Bible classes would attract people who swore by the Bible as the literal word of God. They swore they wrote it, that God wrote this word for word. So I'd have these quizzes out. Let me tell you what I did. I put the words in, and half the quotes are not in the Bible at all. There are people who made quotes sound like they were in the Bible because they thought they were quoting the Bible. In fact, they made up folk religion. So I would give this quiz out, and the average grade would be, are you ready for this? 30. And they'd go, what happened? I said, what happened was you were a victim of folk religion. What does that mean? I said, what that means is you listen to people tell you what was in the Bible. You listen to people give you their opinions, and you assume because it was a pastor, priest, rabbi, or whatever, they were telling you exactly what was there. I said, you're free to do that, but there are consequences to that kind of following. So I showed them where the quotes came from. What was the name of that nut coach in Chicago? What was his name? The pro football coach. I can't remember his name. Anyway, he used to give all these quotes all the time that were biblical. Not one of them was. He said, as the Bible says, and he threw out one of these quotes, didn't mean squat. His last name began with a D, and I can't remember it.
Ditka.
Who?
Ditka.
Ditka. Yes, Michael
Ditka.
Ditka would throw out these biblical quotes all the time. The Bible says, or it says in the Bible, none of them were in there. None of them. New Testament, the same thing. I threw out these quotes. Jesus said this, blah, blah, blah. No, none of them. So the reality is most people don't read the Vedas. Most people don't read the Upanishads in Hinduism. Most people in most religions don't read the basic texts. Now, I'll give you an example. One of the things we do is we do texts and contexts in world religion. And I show how if you take things out of context, when you're reading things, you can do a lot of damage. So I start off by reading the story of Lot and his 2 daughters. Everybody in the class, nobody in the class has ever heard the story of Lot and his 2 daughters, and we read it, they're absolutely appalled. Then when I tell them it comes from the book of Genesis in the Old Testament, they're shocked. Then we talk about Onan spilling his seed on the ground. That floors everybody. Then we talk about if you're raped, you have to marry the rapist, and he's not allowed to divorce you. That sends everybody through the roof. And I said, we talk about Leviticus. If two men lying with each other are found, you should stone them. It's an abomination. They deserve to die. And I said, even if you read the text, if you take them out of context, you can come away with very hurtful. I said, so take a look. Take a look at Lot and his two daughters. Take a look at Onan spilling his seed. Take a look at the two men lying together, and take a look at the woman that's raped and has to marry the rapist. There is one basic thing they all have in common that's essential. And if you don't get this, you're going to come away with a very, very bad, hurtful interpretation of Scripture. What is the one link? Babies. Babies. I said, what is the most important thing in antiquity to survive? Babies. Lot and his two daughters get separated from the rest of their kinsmen. They're now in Canaan. They don't know the rest of the Canaanite tribes. They're scared to death. So what do? It's originally considered an act of heroism. Originally, they made the supreme sacrifice to have babies for the tribe. Today, that's offensive. We're not living 3,000 years ago. We don't get the mind. We really don't understand the mindset. For them, it was Onan spilling his seed on the ground. His brother dies. His wife is a widow. Nobody's going to marry her again because she's used goods, to use the old way of looking at it. So somebody has to what? Make babies for a very fertile woman. The baby will be in his brother's name, and babies continue. Two men can't produce babies. And the idea of a woman, if she's raped, is anybody going to marry her? Absolutely not. But if she's fertile, what can she still have as babies? I hate to be crass and rude and crude, but 3,000 years ago, you could not have anything get in the way. Am I making sense to anybody about making babies? So you take things out of context, and what do you come up with? You get that, I have to watch my language here, that reverend from North Carolina who's on YouTube regularly talking about how homosexuals are an abomination. It says in the Bible, they need to be stoned. God spoke literally in the Bible, and this is what it says. He points this thing out. And, don't even get me going about quoting literal texts. I love people like that. But I'm just saying, this is what you do when you take things out of context. You don't pay attention to what you're reading, and it can get very hurtful. So Hinduism then will begin to develop, like every other group's interpretations. Now, this is where Hinduism differs. Pat comes up with an interpretation, Holly comes up with an interpretation, Maureen comes up with one, and Ron missing a tooth comes up with one. It will be understood, listen to this, even though they totally disagree with each other, you can embrace all of them at the same time. Now, I want you to hear that again. You can have 4 different interpretations that radically disagree, and you can embrace all of them because you can find some truths in each one of them. Now, think about that for a moment. Think about how enlightening that may be. Think about how that keeps you always in kind of a dynamic, and I mean this in the best sense of the word, a dynamic creative tension. Yeah, it can make you neurotic, but it can also give you some good, what's that thing the net has at the bottom of her email? Blessed uncomfort. What is it?
Blessed unrest.
Blessed unrest.
Yeah, it means that you're fighting the good fight. You're not going to rest until you do whatever you can in the world to make it better.
Okay, and sometimes that means looking at different things, whether you like to or not, and holding them into a kind of creative tension. Now, a lot of people don't like that, but I suspect, since we don't know very much, having many different ways to look at things can be really helpful. Now, Roy sent something to me that I didn't realize, and I felt really stupid when I read this thing. I thought Muslims had a bad view of dogs. Roy points out Islam is probably more diverse than Christianity. Now, I know a lot of its diversity, but I don't know it well as Roy does. And he then tells me what one of the Sufis said about the 6 qualities of dogs. I didn't know that at all. So the idea then of having dynamic tension and learning from different groups tells me that how much we can learn all the time. Roy brings a Sufi a point of view. I thought I knew a lot about Sufi. It turns out I know like the tip of an iceberg. And it turns out there are various Sufi expressions and various Sufi schools, like everything else. So all of these different groups kind of keep us on our toes. Now, I think that's good. Others obviously don't. Okay, so you get the Indus Valley, you get their religion automatically is a mix of indigenous people's ideas, peoples moving in, Indian, Iranian peoples moving in, and they are made up of an admixture before them of hunter-gatherers from the southern steppes, hunter-gatherers from what we now call the Levant, mixing together, inventing a wheel, taming a horse, and everything, off we go. What a bunch of admixtures. And then this will collide into the Indus Valley, making it even bigger mixture for what it is worth. By the way, you might want to know that the people in Southeast Asia have a much bigger Neanderthal DNA part than we do in Europe. Have a much, much larger DNA presence. When things got bad, Neanderthals moved east, Denisovians, for instance, and other groups. So they have a much, much better, bigger aspect of Neanderthal DNA than we do. Until this new group came up. Now that we're talking about in the beginning, this new group, you may have read about it, the south of Tel Aviv. They just discovered new bones in a sinkhole. That's a third group. Probably the ancestors to the Neanderthals. They lived hundreds of thousand years, it looked like, and also alongside Homo sapiens for a long while. All new stuff. And you'll notice that, by the way, you missed this, Nanette, both Ron and Doug had parts of their teeth found in that cache. I'm sorry about that. It's not my fault. Major Hindu beliefs. Let's take a look at the first one, Brahman. Now, I want to give you a definition of Brahman. I want to read this to you, and I'll send it to you next time. Let me read to you this definition of Brahman to give you an idea of how Hindus can write. I hope you'll find this fascinating. This is from the Bhagavad Gita, which we'll get to later. I am the beginning, the lifespan, the end of all. The beginning and the end of all. I am the radiant sun among the light givers. I'll send this to you, so don't worry about it. I am the mind. I am consciousness in the living. And listen to the next. I am death that snatches all. I am the source of all that shall be born. I am time without end. I am the sustainer. My face is everywhere. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end in creation. I am the knowledge of things spiritual. I am glory, prosperity, beautiful speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and forgiveness. I am the divine seed of all lives. In this world, nothing animate or inanimate exists without me. I am the strength of the strong. I'm the purity of the good. I'm the knowledge of the knower. There is no limit to my divine manifestations. Whatever in this world is powerful, beautiful, or glorious that you may know to have come forth is but a mere fraction of my power and glory. Whoa. So when you say divine reality is in everything, that gives you an attempt to say what that means. Now, in my classes, this is the kind of thing that I do to try to make this more concrete. If we were face to face, students hate this because I always have people have to stand up and stuff. It embarrasses the heck out of them. So let's say Nanette comes to class late. She has had a stressful time and just wants to be left alone. You know I'm going to pick that out instantly. You just know that. You just know that. So I'm going to say, Nanette. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we'll get to, and by the way, we're going to be doing Islam too. So, Roy, I'm expecting you to help me out. We get to Islam, especially Sufi. All right, so Nanette is sitting there, want to be left alone, and she just knows She sees me walking and she goes, oh, no, 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 no. Nanette, I say, how are you today? She mumbles, go away. I said, no, I'm not going away, which makes it worse. I said, stand up. And I said, I want you to imagine Nanette is, is a giant multifaceted diamond. I said, those of you in back of Nanette cannot see the front of Nanette. Those of you in front of Nanette can't see the back. Those of you on one side can't see the other. Students get it. They're looking at it. I said, now imagine she has multiple facets to her. And you'll notice as she gets near the window, as she moves around, the light hits the facet. So the light will change the color of the facet. And my students go, holy mackerel. I said, think of that as divine reality. No matter where you are, you can't see all of it. As the light changes, the facets change. I said, does that? They said, wow. I said, there are two other ways to look at it. Think if you're in a house. The sun comes up, one light, many windows. You can't always get all of it, but you get some of it until the sun goes down, but it's still there. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean the sun isn't there. I said a kaleidoscope. Does anybody know what a kaleidoscope is? Some people still do. I said, it's one thing, but you put it up, you start messing around with it, it's all over the place, but it's one thing. I said, I think you're going to find the diamond works best. I said, think of divine reality as this giant, multifaceted diamond of none of which you can grasp all of it. And it changes constantly because the light hits the facets differently. And that's the way I try to physically describe and get an idea of what divine reality is according to Hinduism. Sometimes I am successful with this. Sometimes I'm not, but they get the idea. They get the idea. What do you think? Does that make a good example of trying to do that? It's an image. It's an image, I think, that everybody can see. The words here are absolutely beautiful, but if you can get an image of something, I'm thinking of one of the things that people just don't seem to ever get. When you read the New Testament, you get the idea that Jesus talked on. If you ever read the fourth gospel, you have Jesus talking on and on and on and on and on. We know that didn't happen. If you read the Sermon on the Mount or the 6th chapter of Luke, what you get is cut and pastes. Jesus spoke in very small couplets or words in picture form. Everybody forgets, who was his audience? Was his audience a bunch of college students? No. Did his audience have tablets in front of them or phones that they record and take pictures? No. He had peasants who were literate, but if he gave them a picture, they could remember the picture. Hello, that's what you do 2,000 years ago. And that's what I do with my college students with the diamond. You give a picture that you can remember. If you ever read the teachings of Jesus, they're small aphorisms, small sayings. And in Matthew, what they did is cut and paste them together. They did in Luke too. They cut and pasted, but they're all pictures. Think of it. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Why would you put your light under a bushel basket? You're the salt of the earth. Pictures that you can see. Don't cast your pearls before swine. Consider the lilies of the field. All pictures. So when you're talking about how do you communicate things, a diamond or something like that tries to communicate in best form. The Hindus tried it with words, but pretty soon they were drawing pictures. Pretty soon they were heavily involved in art and music. Very, very soon, because they found the words just didn't work except for a small group of people. Now, before I let you go, naturally, if the divine is in everything, that also means the divine is in. What did you say, Holly? I didn't catch it. What? Yes, it's in all of you. I'm looking at all of you, and the fact that the divine is in all of you is scary. I mean, and you know, you're going to find that they're going to argue the divine is in every living thing. And that's why you see, if you ever go to India, Jain priests carrying a long broom. And the idea is if you see something on the road, you don't step on it, because that has some parts of the divine in it too. Would you want to step on the divine? No. So they move it off to the side. And if they see poisonous snakes, they try to put them in a container and move them away. I leave you to think about what you think about that, but that's the idea is the divine in every living thing. Now, Fred Wooten, who's a now retired Unitarian minister, always comes across interesting thing. There's a whole science now about what does it mean to have consciousness. And if you can have consciousness, then you comprehend, if you will, things around you. And things around you may have an idea that you comprehend and experience. And I point out in my classes that a religious experience is not confined to one group, one type of experience, one religion, or one place. And I give an examples. I said a religious experience may be you're in a congregation and you feel infused with the Holy Spirit. You felt the Spirit is literally physically come into you. You raise your hands in just affirmation of this. I said, that's one type, but let me make it very clear. That's not the only type. Barbara Young has had it. She's had it with everything. So she goes out to the causeway at 5:30 in the morning and waits for the sun to come up. And as the sun comes up, she has an experience which just totally moves her beyond me, myself, and I, and everything that was bothering, and whoa. Biologically, what happens in her brain is no different than what happened to that person in church who felt that the Holy Spirit was in them. It was the same reaction chemically in your brain. Holly Duck likes to read. She's reading something and she sees a word that has, and the word leads her like a lot of us do when we're looking at Wikipedia. We're looking up an article. You see something, then you go over here, then you go over here. And by 20 minutes later, you're long from where the first you were looking up. But that word connects you to something else, that connects you to something else, that makes it all come together. A light bulb goes on. Ron has had it with everything and turns on some music from the islands. He retreats back into when he was 16. Oh, mercy. And Ron relives being 16, having to rebel against a father who is a scientist. Yes, there's a part of Ron that you don't know. He was I know that. And Ron's going to know, how do you know that? Yes, he rebelled. And so he listens to music. Religious experiences, I would argue, are those type of experiences that transform you in a good way, that gets you beyond the me, myself, and I, and connects you with something more. And that's why John Fraser said to us in All Souls, I'm an atheist. How can I have a religious experience? And I said, how could you not? You can have both things at the same time. Why not? And Fraser looks at me and he said, you know, I that's true, isn't it? I said, why? I said, you should know better than this. He laughed at me. Yeah. So I'm just saying, the Atman is that bit of the divine in all of us. And so why can't you apprehend that or prehend that in a myriad ways? What may work for one person may be totally different for another, but it can be very real. When Fraser was with us, he used this phrase that he noticed with people around the world. Did any of you remember the phrase? I know Maureen does, the less visible world. The less visible world. There's that which you see, but you and I well know what we always see isn't what's there. You know that. So he calls it the less visible world. Other people sense it. He said, we may be so technological, whatever we are, that we are not even seeing what's in front of us. So The Atman is that divine bit of reality in all of us. So classic Vedic Hinduism would argue Brahman is one divine reality in everything. But part of that is in all living things. So Hinduism would, of course, answer that dogs, cats, including even Roland, maybe, would be having some bit of the divine in him. Nanette, Roland is one of the 11 types of animals that I forgot, or things that I forgot that people have as pets. I have 11 different species, including a Florida blue centipede whose name is Roland. Don't even ask. I have to call Angie about that. That's her daughter's centipede. So then we've got this, wrapping it up if I can, indigenous groups of people in a thriving early civilization. That includes Afghanistan, parts of Afghanistan, all of Pakistan, India today, Western India, a huge area, thriving because of waterways and waterways that also make for good planting. As the waterways begin to dry up, Maureen pointed out chemically, you get salt coming in, you just can't do crops, everything begins to fail. Where do you get these things with such good understanding? Oh, Ron is talking to Maureen. You need to know, Ron, she's married to somebody who brings a cultural background that is really cool. Although she says she's an atheist, she bribes God regularly. I'll let it go at that. So you get, I like that. That was a good thought. You bribe God regularly. All right. So you have an indigenous group of people, a good chunk of what we now call Pakistan, Western India, and Southern Afghanistan. You saw that on the map. You can see that, the Indus Valley culture. These people have ideas and they are religious. They have ideas about how you look at things and things beyond. Into this group will come regularly groups of people migrating in from the West who are admixtures from groups before. And by 1500 BC, people would say, we got to write all this down. It is wild. It's all over the place. There are just too many ideas. And so they try to write it together to come up with making sense of all these different ideas. And from that, we'll call the 4 Vedas. The Rig Veda is the most famous one. It's about how we were created and creation happened. All right. So that's what we do. And that then passes down and ultimately will be called Hinduism. Originally, it was called the religion of the Vedas. There is a huge debate about how the word Hindu came about. Sindhu, Sindhu, is an ancient word that Proto-Iranian migrants would call Sindhu, Hindu. You got the Indus Valley River. Indus comes Hindus. The English have a different way of looking at it. It is a total mix. Nobody knows for absolutely sure how the word Hindu came about. It is a foreign word that ultimately they accepted. Jesus is not Jesus's name. It was Yeshua or Yeshasha, depending on whether you Aramaic or Hebrew. Jesus is how the Greeks tried to make sense of Aramaic or Hebrew, and they get Jesus. How they got Jesus from Yeshua or Yeshasha, I'm not sure, but they did. So we go back in a time machine and you ask for Jesus, they're not going to have any idea who you're talking about. Try Yeshua or Yeshasha, Galilee, carpenter, followers, speaks to peasants, puts hands on people to try to heal them, gets the authorities always mad. They'll know who you're talking about. Another famous word, Confucius. That was not his name. Confuzi. Master Kong, son of Kong. Kung Fu Tzu, TZU means son of. Confuzi. Master Kong, that was his name. How they got Confucius, I have no idea. Chinese today know that word. Indians know the word Hindu. People in Palestine know Jesus, but you need to know those were not the original words. Okay, we're way over time. Any parting thoughts? Let me say goodbye again to people who are here. Any parting thoughts before I start saying goodbye to everybody? Any parting thoughts? Okay, we got John then from Port Orange. Pat is in forest shrubs.